we can get you anywhere you go. The government have been sending messengers to women who run away and leave the country, intimidating them, harassing them, trying to get them back, trying even to kidnap them.
This is a constant fear of women who flee from the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Manal al-Sharif is a women's rights activist, an engineer and author. Manal fled Saudi Arabia and now lives in a self-imposed exile in Australia. And she is here with me today. Manal, thank you so much for joining us. Now, since you fled Saudi Arabia, how different is your life now?
I've been living in Australia for 2 years now. So yesterday was my second anniversary, and everyone asked me, when they ask me about my life, I say, and if anyone asks me about my age, I say I'm 2 years old. This is the time I finally living in a self-imposed exile where there are no societal constraints, religious constraints, no expectations. You meet yourself for the first time. You just look in the mirror. You don't have to meet anyone's expectation to be who you are, to speak up your mind also. Before, because I go back to Saudi Arabia, I would be very careful crafting my messages, self-censoring the things I say. Now I can write and speak freely because I'm not going back to Saudi Arabia, and I can openly criticize the government and openly criticize the political system in Saudi Arabia and ask for reforms.
When did you decide, okay, Saudi Arabia is not safe enough for me, I'm leaving?
It's a very long story. It didn't happen right away. It took me a year to realize that I can't be in Saudi Arabia, especially when I chose to accept a speaking invitation to speak about for the first time in public. And I went to Oslo, in Oslo Freedom Forum, and I spoke about growing up as a radical Muslim and how I had to align all the radical ideas that I was brought up believing in, covering my face, believing infidels should be killed because they're our enemies. So just growing up with all these ideas and then challenging them as a woman on a international stage like Oslo Freedom Forum. When I went back to Saudi Arabia, there was a fatwa that I'm apostate. I'm not a Muslim anymore. And I was called Oslo traitor. The pain was so much, and the death threats were real when I was there after I came from Oslo in 2012, May 2012. And that's the month I had to leave the country. I kept going back to Saudi Arabia, but I couldn't live there anymore.
And did your father also have to give you the permission to leave the country in 2012?
Yes, my father, until this day, I'm turning 40 this year, and my father, until this day, is the one who gives me the permission to leave the country as an adult woman, a mother of two.
Now, before moving on, what exactly is the male guardianship system? Under Saudi law, all women must have a male guardian, be it a father, a brother, husband, or even a son. Now, let's take a look at what exactly they're used for. The woman would need permission from a male guardian for the most basic of needs, education, employment, or even to travel or marriage. Now, Manal, you are one of the pioneers of your generation to demand for the right to drive, but you're not alone. What is the fate of your fellow women's activists in Saudi Arabia?
So a few weeks before the ban is officially lifted in Saudi Arabia, the women who fought all these years for the right to drive, been all summoned, all of them in solitary confinement today. And those women being tortured and these allegations being confirmed by human rights organizations and by their families. I confirmed it from their families myself. And those women are today in jail, and no one is really talking about them. No one is bringing them up. And finally, they are sending them to trials after 9 months in jail. And no one knows what are the charges they're facing. So this is a call to Germany and to the European Union to bring up such a serious allegation of violation of those women's rights activists and human rights activists in the Saudi jails today. Why they're in jail, what are their what are the charges against them, and why they don't have access to legal help.
You have pointed out a very important issue of the women in Saudi Arabia, but as a woman in exile, following the case of Khashoggi murder, what fears do you have living in Australia, knowing that you have a Saudi Arabian embassy in Australia?
Living abroad after Jamal Khashoggi, it was a huge shock for everyone. I wrote for the same editor in the Washington Post with Jamal Khashoggi, and I used to write in the same newspaper in Saudi Arabia with him. So twice we write for the same newspaper, and the brutal way of his assassination and how the body was also disappeared, no one knows where his body, it was sending a very clear message that we can get you anywhere you go. The government had been sending messengers to women who run away and leave the country, intimidating them, harassing them, trying to get them back, trying even to kidnap them. And these are allegations that I've been receiving from women on asylum, on exile. There are 80 women applying for asylum here, Saudi women applying for asylum here in Australia. It's epidemic. The UN Refugee Commission they said in 2018, there'd been 1,000 Saudi applying for asylum abroad. And this epidemic number shows you exactly what's happening. People are leaving the country applying for asylum in fear for their life.
If someone is in Saudi Arabia and is watching you right now, what tips would you give them if they are planning an escape? What would you do if you were in their shoes?
If you are in Saudi Arabia at this time, do not talk. Do not even breathe. Just be quiet, because it's really dangerous. They're putting their life in danger. They're putting the life of their families in danger. So it's not safe at this time. People like us in a self-imposed exile, we can bring up the media attention to the abuses that's happening in Saudi Arabia. Women who run away, the only thing I can tell them is they have to have financial support, because when they run away, it's really difficult for women to get housing or food or basic needs for them when they run away. There are 2 women, they've been stranded in Hong Kong for the last 5 months. They were trying to come to Australia and apply for asylum. The Australian government revoked their visa when they knew they were coming here and applying for asylum. I tell them, don't come to Australia, because the asylum laws in Australia are really brutal. They strip you from your credentials, so you can't even use your credentials to get a job. You don't have access to healthcare. You don't have access to welfare. You have access to nothing here. So I'd just say, if you want to run away if you're in Saudi Arabia, stay quiet. If you run away, don't run to Australia. It's one of the worst countries to run to.
Thank you so much, Manal, for your time. It was a pleasure having you here.
Thank you.
I am not free while any woman is unfree, even when her shackles are very different from my own. These words from Audre Lorde, an African-American civil rights activist, beautifully wrap up the story of Manal al-Sharif, who, even after fleeing Saudi Arabia, continues to fight for the rights of women there. That's all from me today. To make sure you don't miss any videos like this one, click on the subscription button below and leave us your comments as well. Until next time, goodbye.